I'm Dale Curtis, and I'm speaking with Chris Mitchell, Vice President of Global Government Relations at IPC, an industry group that represents electronics manufacturers. And in this brief interview, we're discussing the legislation originally known as USICA in the Senate, or the America Competes Act in the House, and which is now going by the name of the Bipartisan Innovation Act. These bills have some differences, but they both would provide $52 billion to boost U.S. semiconductor chip manufacturing and billions more for research and development of other advanced technologies. Chris, welcome. And what do America's electronics manufacturers think about this legislation?
Electronic manufacturers enthusiastically support this Bipartisan Innovation Act. It is long overdue. Not only do we need an overhaul of federal R&D programs, but it is critically important to get this funding component for the CHIPS Act enacted into law. Again, as you said, $52 billion to support the semiconductor supply chain. And that money is not only going to go to silicon fabrication, but it's also going to go to advanced packaging, which is a critical component of making sure that we in the United States are able to manufacture the most sophisticated semiconductor components.
So are you saying that the electronics industry has bigger problems than just the chip shortage?
Well, again, the semiconductor chip is almost uniquely important in electronics devices. All that being said, we know, and we've known now for more than 2 decades, that we have a major industrial base challenge in this country around electronics. And so, yes, we absolutely need to treat this legislation as the first of multiple steps in helping to rebuild U.S. electronics manufacturing. What does that mean? It means looking at how we support other segments of the industry, quite frankly, segments of the industry that have been neglected by government, despite repeated warnings by experts both inside and outside of government. And so again, we need to look at all legislative and regulatory opportunities to make sure that we are better supporting the ecosystem that supports electronics manufacturing. And if I could just really quickly, it's not just from a legislative perspective. Certainly we need to focus our efforts there as well. But as we look toward implementation of the Bipartisan Innovation Act, right now in both the House and Senate legislation, there is money targeted for supply chain resiliency. And we're hopeful that once passed, the administration will look to use that funding to better support the electronics manufacturing industry, an industry that is really central to innovation across our entire economy.
What is the state of the electronics industry in the United States right now?
Well, what in the United States we have demonstrated is that we can design the most sophisticated electronics. Actually building those electronics in the United States, especially at scale, is a different matter. And that's really where we need to build up our capabilities. This is especially acute in the area of IC substrates, but also in printed circuit board fabrication. We have seen this migration of the industry from the United States largely to Asia over the last 20, 30 years. So we've come to a point where today we are 3 to 4% of global production of PCBs. Go back to the 80s, 90s, we were more than 30% of global production. So we've seen this really steep decline. And I don't think we should kid ourselves. That decline comes with an erosion, not just in terms of capacity, but also in terms of capability. This is an industry that learns by doing. And when we are not producing here the most sophisticated electronics and at scale, we are losing on the opportunity to build our craft and hone our skills and build our capabilities.
Great. Recently, there was legislation introduced in the House by Congresswoman Anna Eshoo of California and Congressman Blake Moore of Utah that would specifically focus on the printed circuit board sector. What can you tell us about that?
Well, the bill has now been introduced. And again, I think that these members, Representatives Eshoo and Moore, they understand that the CHIPS Act is the first step among many in rebuilding our electronics manufacturing ecosystem. And again, I think this this legislation is the right next step. It essentially follows a model that is very similar to the CHIPS Act. You have the investment component, basically putting the government in a position to invest in manufacturing capacity, manufacturing capabilities, as well as R&D and workforce training, which we know is a big challenge here in the United States. We simply do not have the skilled workforce to support the growth that the industry is experiencing right now. So that's all great. And at the same time, even as we invest in these capabilities and capacity, we need to make sure that there is a growing demand for domestically made electronics. And so there is a tax component as well that would provide 25% tax credit to those U.S. taxpayers, OEMs, EMS companies that purchase or acquire U.S. made PCBs. So again, I think it's meant to stimulate the demand for U.S. made PCBs on one hand, while on the other, making sure that we have the capability to meet that demand. So again, we're thrilled that the legislation has been introduced. It's not only a great opportunity for the industry to make sure that we're educating policymakers, but at the same time, this is a great opportunity for government to step up and make sure that as they talk about rebuilding our industrial base, they're giving due attention to the electronics industry.
All right. Where can our listeners get more information about this, Chris?
IPC.org. If you go to the advocacy and government relations pages, you'll get plenty of information on the bill, as well as how you can ensure that policymakers hear your voice and co-sponsor this legislation. So I encourage everybody listening to this to go to IPC.org, learn more about the bill, and reach out to their members of Congress. It's really critical at this point, given the heightened interest in our supply chain, that people are weighing in and they're making sure that their members of Congress hear them.
That's great, Chris. Thank you. All right. So listeners, once again, the address for more information and taking action is ipc.org. You can look under Advocacy or Action Center if you want to send a message to your elected officials in Washington. Please let us know if you have any other questions. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dale.